the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 317. What kind of sentiments? I'm Hannah Wallen here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity Mike Stevenson. And we've been going over the Declaration of Sentiments, and we're still in there. We're hanging in there. It's a kind of a slog because aside from the fact that it's written in the style of the early 20th century, which is nothing like 21st century speak, it's whiny and bitchy too, so it's a little rough for us because we're not very good at the whole whiny bitchy thing, although I was doing that before the show, but that's for a different reason. So we're going to sort of recap a little bit before we get into more of this, and we'll still continue to compare it with the Declaration of Independence. If we get all the way through this, we'll go back to the timeline a little bit. I have the timeline right here, as you can see. And yes, please save to avoid losing my... I didn't do anything. I just opened it. Paranoid. It's because it's a site for school teachers, and you have to remind them to do everything. It's really bad. They complain about their students, but, you know. In any case, before we do that, we gotta do what we gotta do, so let's get on with it. As always, Honey Badger dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, we'll get back into... So last week we sort of took a look at... And I'll open this back up. We sort of took a look at the fact that the Seneca Falls Convention was sort of started from one perspective. It wasn't something that, like, women from all over the country were like, yeah, let's do this. a couple of women who were offended at being excluded from a emancipation convention, from an anti-slavery, a world anti-slavery convention, because they were women. Decided that there needed to be this tantrum by women to be included in things men were doing. So they decided to play in this convention. And the main people who planned this, two of them were sisters, four of them were Quakers, although one had been expelled for marrying a non-Quaker, but she was raised a Quaker. So there were, out of the 5 organizers, 4 of them were Quakers. So they all had, there was not a diversity of thought there, in either spelling of the word thought or diversity. But in any case...
It needs to be said, slavery was so much better before women ruined it. Now, I'm going to let that quote hang in the air before you'll think of the various different avenues of how that would work, of how many slaves throughout history were male and how many were female. And sure, they were both, and they were generally used for different purposes. But do we talk about the victims or do we talk about the perpetrators? I mean, for the most of history, men were both when it came to slavery. They were most of the slaves and most of the slave drivers. But the women came along and said, no, we want to be the slave drivers. Anything else you want to volunteer yourselves for, ladies? No, I don't see any other part of the equation into which we could possibly fit. Because we already are and always have been. Woman is synonymous with slave. Well, no, Eastern European is synonymous with slave. But we can do whatever we like with language. We can bugger about with words all we like. Yeah, slave is another word for woman. Woman's another word for slave. And you all owe us reparations in the form of letting us enslave you for the rest of time. And we'll call you an incel if you don't like it. And so on and so forth.
Yep, and they have done that. Like, that's actually the latest, greatest, next best way that women try to shut up men who complain about real life issues that are affecting them. You know, you don't like being fired from your job just to make room for somebody that's less competent than you because of their demographic. Oh, shut up, you incel. You know, you don't want to be raped. Shut up, you incel. You know, you don't want your wife to take your children, leave the marriage, and then prevent you from nurturing and caring for them, but demand that you support her lifestyle after the marriage. Shut up, you incel. You know, like that's pretty much the go-to answer, right? But when you don't talk about your feelings and your thoughts and what you want in your life and what you're not getting in your life and stuff, well, that's toxic masculinity. Women aren't to blame for that, right? and shut up, you incel. But yeah, that's pretty much where we are. So thanks, Seneca Falls. But not to blame the location of the convention, obviously. And I will also point out, we mentioned last week, there was also a very strong anti-suffragette movement, and it wasn't just a few, ignorant women that didn't know how much they wanted the vote, like feminists try to portray it today. The anti-suffrage movement was bigger than the suffragette movement for most of the time that the two existed, until the suffragettes basically pushed and pushed and pushed until people started acquiescing. Like, oh, okay, well, we'll go along with this. All right, this is what women want now, so this is what we're women. We have to want this, right? The antis testified before legislatures, published articles and newsletters, held public meetings, debated the suffragists, and collected signatures to urge Congress to not give women the vote. So, yeah. This was not just like a handful of malcontents, bunch of pick-me's, right? That feminists talk about. This was pretty much the mainstream opinion at the time. So what we went over last week pointed out starters. And I can make this much bigger because it's not a PDF file like the other one. The reasons cited for the Declaration of Independence were actually much more egregious violations of human rights than the reasons cited for the Declaration of Sentiments. You had in the time period, as we went over in past episodes, you had a circumstance where the people in the colonies were being economically squeezed to death. Their hold on the land was being not just challenged, but really shaken up by legislation passed by the King of England. And their ability to travel, their ability to engage in trade with each other, their ability to survive where they were was in jeopardy because their time period's version of BlackRock had been given a monopoly on several of the most important goods for them. It had been authorized to enforce that monopoly. There were law enforcement there from Britain also to enforce that monopoly. Part of the land on which colonists had settled had been reallocated so that it was now part of the province at the time of Canada instead of the colonies of the Americas. So it was actually a completely different territory, which created issues of separation legally for families and such. So they really were, they had just been through a war that they didn't really want anything to do with. The French and Indian War spilled over into the colonies, and there was a lot of fighting that took place there. But the colonists really didn't have a dog in that fight, other than they didn't want to die. And so they were sort of dragged into that against their will. And it left them already dealing with hardship because of that. And then on top of that, England started taxing them to pay for it. So they really had a lot of reasons why they decided. And the worst part was they couldn't just send delegates to Parliament, to participate in the parliamentary system in Britain, because everything happening in Britain happened too quickly for delegates to get there from across the ocean. So their delegates would have arrived after the fact and had nothing to say about it at that point, because they wouldn't have, we're talking about a time period where travel was you sail on a ship across the ocean, you ride horse and carriage across the country, none of this flying there, none of this, and sailing was much slower and much more dangerous than it is today as well. Even the pirates were more dangerous, even though people think of pirates as something that happened in history. You don't sail in the wrong part of the world today, or you'll discover that's not the case at all. They're just not. They're different. We'll just say that. You won't run into the Black Pearl. But there you go. So that's the situation that the colonists were dealing with, right? So they were complaining that the king was pretty much ruling over them while excluding them from having any input, no representation, that he didn't even allow his governors to handle local affairs, that he had removed the right of due process in terms of if you are accused of a crime, you're presumed guilty unless proven innocent. You're tried under a not navy, maritime law instead of under the law of the land, and so you're dealing with a complete lack of due process. Dissolved their representative houses, so he's basically made it impossible for them to have any autonomy at all in the colonies, and that's what they were upset about. Complete lack of autonomy, complete lack of ability to survive economically, and an oppressive situation in terms of their ability to survive factually because of those two combined things. And I will point out, there wasn't a reciprocal, well, these people are responsible for you, they're going to take care of you, and they'll give you the food you need, the shelter you need, the clothing you need, the safety that you need. They weren't protected like women were under coverture. It was basically a rock and a hard place, closing in on either side of the colonists. And the colonists was like, we're like, fuck you, we're not doing this. All right, we're gonna fight about it, and here's the fight. Right. So that's where we ended up last week. Meanwhile, the suffragettes' complaints essentially were that coverture, which made the husband wholly responsible for the welfare of the wife, limited the wife in ways that were necessary in order for the husband to uphold those duties. You can't take responsibility for someone and be obligated to ensure they don't break the law, to ensure they have everything they need, to ensure any property they own is not mismanaged, and so on, if you don't have control over those things legally. So they complained that history has repeatedly injured and usurped women on the part of man, by establishing an absolute tyranny over women. Mind you, women didn't have to get married. A woman could not be forced into marriage at this point in time.
A tyranny that kept them fed and clothed and housed and safe and warm in the wintertime, and really?
And he couldn't even make her do the housework. Like, if he tried to use force, and this is something, somebody tried to dispute this in last week's show. We might go over those comments. But Wikipedia, the non-source of non-sources, the blog of encyclopedias. Sorry, I have more disdain for Wikipedia than I do for people's rando medium blogs. It's pathetic. But Wikipedia talks about the fact that in some court cases, judges not looking at actual law and not ruling on anything to do with domestic violence in the moment, cited a non-existent legal standard, the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is not, and never has been, a legal standard. It was debunked by more than one person. Right? Christina Hoff Sommers is probably the one that's most well known for it. But if you look at The Unknown History of Misandry, God, I can't think of his name. Robert Estef, I think, is the owner of that blog. He has put up news articles after news article after news article that show that our society has always had a response to domestic violence that made it very clear that it was illegal for men to engage in domestic violence against women. Not necessarily true the other way around. Yeah, my microphone is not doing so well, huh? Well, part of it might just be me. But let me see if I've got it turned down again. No, it's not turned down.
Yeah, I hear you fine.
I wonder what's going on there. Alright, we'll see if we can fix it a little bit. I've turned it up to maximum volume. That's as high as I can get it to go. So, sorry if it's not loud enough. Well, and every so often, OBS tells me that I've clipped. Like, it goes all the way up into the red and just hovers there for a second. So I don't know if it's doing that, if that's coming across or not, but it looks really bad from my end. So it might be about time for me to replace this. I've had this for a long time. I've had it for so long that it no longer even has the little cushy parts on it. Like, those are gone completely. I recorded my first, I want to say I recorded one of my earliest HBR Talk openers with this microphone, this headset. So that should tell you something. Anyway. Yeah, we were at, women didn't have that situation. But, yeah. So we read the first several of these already. Never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. So it's inalienable, right? Everybody has the right to vote but women at that point in time, right? No. No. Most people, when women started fighting for the right to vote in the United States, most people did not have the right to vote. Everybody that was not white was pretty much excluded. Some people, even if they immigrated, even if their parents had immigrated and they were born here, could not be citizens because of their race. And I'm not even just talking about people who had been enslaved, right? I'm talking about people who came here voluntarily and worked, could not be citizens because of their race. People who were here before a single white person set foot in most of the country couldn't vote, couldn't be citizens, couldn't vote until the next century, actually, when women started agitating for suffrage. So the idea that this was inalienable, at the time, that was not a thing. Withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. We talked about that too. There are several rights that were denied to both natives and foreigners that were allocated to women. Oh, I remember. I stopped in the middle of talking about that rule of thumb. I would recommend, if anybody has any doubts about that, we put out a production a while back during the Johnny Depp case. The title of it is something like "Why Johnny Depp Can't Ever Clear His Name as a Man," and that's I believe on the Honey Badger Radio channel, not the live streams channel. It might be on the live streams channel, but it's in the videos section, not the live streams section. It's about 45 minutes long, and it thoroughly debunks the claim that our society ever tolerated domestic violence against women. It doesn't, debunk the claim that our society tolerated domestic violence against men. Our society did not forever. It did not penalize women for engaging in domestic violence against men. Guess who got penalized if that happened?
The men themselves got penalized.
Yes.
By it had a specific name. I forgot what it is. Where they bashed the pots and pans. The Skimmington Ride.
The Skimmington Ride. That's right.
Yeah.
So if a man beat his wife, the village would actually come and get him, take him out, drag him around town, put him on a donkey, ride him around backwards, beat him, make fun of him, call him everything but late for dinner, and then return him to her still able to do whatever he did for a living, right? If a woman beat her husband, they did exactly the same thing to him.
Thankfully, things have changed nowadays, and men don't get subjected to ritualistic state punishment for being abused by their domestic partners. Heaven forfend that such a thing would take place. But it's the government doing it now. When it was the villagers doing it, it was barbaric. But now that someone's been appointed to do it, and not by banging on pots and pans, but by dragging away the already bloodied corpse of a man. Well, not a corpse. The already bloodied body of a man, throwing him in the back of a police car and letting him just live with his kidney damage for the next 24 hours in a cell.
Yeah, well, now what they do is take his dead and bloodied body and post it all over social media and gain,
Yep.
clicks and dopamine hits for all the clicks and likes that they'll get, and the you go girls.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, people are still pushing this rule of thumb thing, as you were talking about earlier. And you don't even need to go to a haughty source to debunk that. Even Wikipedia, and I know normally Wikipedia is not the place to go to for reliable facts, but that's because they're so biased in favor of whatever the communist revolution is doing right now. But it includes, and always has included, man bad, woman weak. But even Wikipedia will fill you in on how this idea that the rule of thumb was about a stick no wider than your thumb that you could use to beat your wife. It was, and if even the platforms that are as determined as possible to get away with lying for the cause of feminism, even if they can't get away with it, even if the people who are able to rewrite history at a moment's notice at a whim, even if they can't get away with this lie, that ought to tell you that it's among the least substantiated of feminist lies, and that's saying something.
Yep, because Wikipedia is crowdsourced in a weird way. It goes against what every other reliable source of information uses as its means of determining what is fact versus what is not fact. So, for instance, if we held a conference and filmed it, which we have done, and our video showed a sequence of events at the conference that demonstrated exactly what happened there, and you could tell there wasn't anything left out that we didn't film or whatever, and then news media reported that something else happened that wasn't on the video that would have been shown if it had happened. And they would accept that news report. But since the video is a primary source, they wouldn't accept that, right? You can go into court as a witness, and your witness statement is taken to be the truth unless it's proved otherwise. But if you write your autobiography and someone else writes a news article that is just completely fabricated about your life, that news article is given more credibility than your autobiography. So if you get diagnosed with something and you put that in your autobiography, I was diagnosed with condition X, and the article writer says, well, it was no such condition ever existed, even if it does, or this individual was never diagnosed, has never been to a doctor, and just completely lied about that, but they have no proof in the article, they definitely accept that article but not your autobiography. So Wikipedia is crap in my book. I have no respect for it, and I don't accept it as a source. When I was an educator, didn't accept it as a source, and I won't accept it as a source in an argument either. You better find something else besides Wikipedia. I try to avoid referring to it in any of my work. I'll go investigate the sources cited by the people who have written Wikipedia articles to see if I can find the information that they're claiming they found. And I will say this too. There have been many times when I've taken a Wikipedia article about something, gone through the sources, looked for the information that they're citing from those sources, or citing those sources as a source for, and it's not there. It doesn't say that. And in a few instances, it's said the opposite, and it's been pretty obvious that the writer of the Wikipedia article just didn't understand what they read. So, don't, it's, if you're looking up what a particular drug does, or what a particular scientific formula is about, and stuff like that, chemical formula is about, okay, that's, you're probably going to get decent information on that, because the people that do those articles don't have a political agenda, and they're usually not stupid. But don't trust anything you read on Wikipedia that is governed by the social sciences. So, non-humanitarian anti-feminism. If you have questions about the Badger Cave, you gotta ask Allison. I don't have anything to do with that. I'm in Ohio. So, just so you know, we are in Saskatchewan, Ohio, Connecticut, London. I can't remember what community Brian moved to, but he's in Virginia. We have people in Arizona. We've got, I don't remember what community Karen's from, but she's from a different part of Canada than Allison is from. So we're in different places. Non-humanitarian anti-feminism. The question was not for the audience. Like, that's bullshit. No one believes that. Right? Like, you wouldn't be in our chat asking a question to a group of people that are not actually part of the organization about what the organization is doing. Like, have at least a little bit of decency if you're going to troll. Like, have at least a little bit of intelligence behind your trolling. Just saying that.
I feel a bit left out because I can't,
can't see
read
the
the chat right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
This guy is an idiot.
no, he's
claiming he was asking the audience if the audience is paying rent on the Badger Cave. Like, that,
what?
It kind of indicates that the guy doesn't know what he's talking about. A lot of our audience doesn't give us a dime. Most of our audience doesn't give us a dime. Like, and that's fine. That's not the point. Oh, okay, I see. That explains that. So, you've lost your mind. So, alright. Well, in that case, I think we're pretty much done, because, that's like arguing with somebody who's, in a mental health institution, except they've gotten out and are on YouTube making comments instead.
Yeah, there's no point in arguing with people like that, because they come here with presuppositions, and you're not going to change their minds. And that's fine. Come here and troll. Hey, come, just click the like button on the way in or out, please. Thank you. Share it.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's well, and like case in point, he just asked a question I already answered. So that tells you where the conversation is going to go if I continue.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah.
Back to the suffragettes and back to the question of, did they have any real feminism? We're still looking in this document for the real feminism, which we haven't seen. And remember, we're told that misandry is not real feminism. Whining about
real
men
feminism
is not real feminism.
Real feminism has never been tried before, Hannah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Real feminism is about equality, but real feminism has never been tried.
Will the real feminism please stand up?
That's.
Are you the one with the dyed hair, by any chance?
So we are told that we went over a couple of things here. Women have no voice in the formation of the laws that they're compelled to submit to, except the women's Christian temperance movement proved otherwise. They not only got a law passed, they got an amendment to the Constitution passed that was so bad that it created a new thing in the United States that had not previously existed. Organized crime around that was organized around the trade of illicit substances. Like the drug trade that we are dealing with today wasn't a problem. The alcohol trade preceded it, and that trade started, the illicit alcohol trade started as a result of the passage of the 18th Amendment, which was of course the Temperance Amendment. So there you go. Women have no voice, no power, no influence. Got an amendment to the Constitution that was so bad it had to be repealed later. Passed with no voice and no power and no influence. Oh, the humanity, where's my fainting couch?
Just useless. Worthless, I tell you. Nothings. Just absolute nothing. Write them off to the dregs of history. Bye with you, women.
And we debunked also the fact that women in the eye of the law were civilly dead, because wives could sue their husbands for non-support. They could sue for their husbands for not having sex with them. Right? They could actually take you to court for that. Right? They could divorce their husbands for abuse or adultery, and they could collect on that. The claim that he made her morally an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. Again, you have every right to not commit crimes, even if the court, the law, the police, the government, whatever, does nothing to you for it. Just because you are able to do something doesn't mean you're obligated to do it. If
Bear in mind, all of this legal labyrinths only really applied to the top whatever percent of women, up to and including the time this was written, like 100 years ago, or something.
Yeah.
And for the longest time. Wait, what was I saying just now?
Oh, the top echelons, like for instance.
Oh yeah. What and when you call out the posh rich women for what they're saying, rich women weren't able to do, and you say, nah, actually, posh rich women were able to do this, they then pivot to, well, what about the working class women? Or at least they should, according to their communist principles. They should turn around and say, well, what about the women who couldn't afford all of these luxuries? What about the working class women and their husbands? Well, they got along with each other. I know that sounds hard to believe, but the men and women who had to get along with each other did. Throughout most of human history, it was left up to the frumpy wenches in the frocks in the late 1800s to start arguing and splitting hairs about the few things that the top 1% of men can do, but the top 1% of women struggle to do, not can't do, but can do and struggle to do. And yeah, they'll keep on that avenue of argument until you actually point out that this was all just posh people arguing with each other, and because posh people are kind of more drawn to victim mentality because they have time to waste on that sort of thing, you start to realize that this was all arguing about how many fairies can dance on the head of a pin. Well, for the most part, men and women were getting along with each other as and when they had to. And it's not that difficult. If we could follow the example of the men and women who did get along with each other for the vast majority of human history, rather than following the example of frumpy, pinched-faced wenches from 100 years ago, for whom the top 1% was just not enough because men exist. It's all, and I cannot express this enough, so tiresome.
Yep. One of the things that interests me about the way women divided in history, you had the middle class was kind of small throughout most of history. There weren't very many people that fit into it because you had to have sort of a Goldilocks position of having maybe a little bit of property or being in a position where you are in charge of property in order to get there, or you had to have enough of an education to get paid well for what you did, but not so much that you got paid the way that, say, a legislator or a doctor might get paid today. And your level of success once you hit a certain point would increase just on the basis of, once you had that success, you might write about it. People were much more skilled about that historically. You might have other things. You'd be more in demand because that level of skill wasn't exactly common at the time. So you ended up at a higher level of success than the middle class. So you had this division between women who everything they ever wanted that existed during their time was paid for by their husbands or else. And because their husbands were rich, if they didn't spoil them rotten and the woman did sue for non-support, a judge would consider that, well, he could afford it, so he should do it for her. Whereas then you had the women who were impoverished, living with within a family where everybody worked, including children as young as 4 and 5 years old, and they didn't have time to worry about that shit, right? If their property, which might be the pittance they earned in the workplace, wasn't communally handled in the family by their husband, who did all the budgeting, probably with them overseeing it, their family would starve. So there wasn't this governance so much by men as there was a combined set of resources as a result of need. Women that did that They're the ones that looked at the women going, well, we need voting rights, and went, why? Our husbands are doing their best for us. Our husbands are taking care of us. What are you so upset about? Are you upset because you didn't get enough silk dresses this year? I'm sorry, but I'm busy helping to support my family. So you had the snoots versus the rednecks, I guess. And they really didn't. They didn't have time to worry about this shit. But yeah. The response that we got in the chat regarding the so-called rule of thumb was in response to this one at the top here. He had the right to administer chastisement. Right, now, historically, marriage was not created by the government. Marriage was created by the church. And historically, the church had a hierarchy of who's in charge of the household. And it actually went along with how marriage evolved. It didn't evolve out of two people loving each other and choosing to be together as a tradition. It evolved out of families arranging for their kids when they got old enough to marry each other in order to form a stronger union between two families so that they would be stronger than the surrounding families. It evolved out of feudal systems and pre-feudal systems where it was tribe against tribe and family against family, and there was economic competition, and then there was also violent competition between families. So marriage wasn't just a matter of, gosh, I think this person is awesome, I want to be with them for the rest of my life. It was, this family has a lot of cows, and this family has a lot of land. We should combine, and we have a lot of financial power and can hire mercenaries to defend our land and our cows, and we'll be wealthy. Like, that's how marriage evolved. Aside from that, you just had people that would shack up and have kids together if they were from more along the lines of the peasantry. Maybe a marriage would be arranged here and there in order for a man to ensure that his daughter was well taken care of by somebody who he knew was going to be financially stable. Right? But it wasn't something that people invented to prove their love to each other. So this part is where we, I think, stopped last week. He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes of divorce in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of the woman. The law in all cases going upon a false supposition of the supremacy of man and giving all power into his hands. So, in other words, the suffragettes didn't say divorce is too hard, or divorce screws up the family and men can leave with impunity. No, it was divorce laws don't consider women's happiness.
Yeah, exactly.
First.
And right. And I'm sorry, but your happiness doesn't come first when there's children involved. That should be first and foremost obvious to anyone involved, right? So no, I'm sorry, you don't have to like it. Nobody likes it when a marriage breaks up. Well, unless it's a particularly unhappy marriage, But no, your whims, your wishes don't exist anymore. You know what I mean? Your happiness is no longer a part of the equation, and that's the problem. This is the problem with today's women, right? Because you have these kids, and you think that it's just going to be all perfect and sunshine and rainbows, and it's just not. But your happiness is not the most important thing here. It's about your children. And women have lost the focus there, right? like,
Yep.
your happiness be damned. I mean, my God, I'm not happy. Well, duh.
The point at which you have a child is the point at which someone else's happiness is more important than yours, or should be, or at least
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to put these things in hierarchies, but a child cannot attain its own happiness. A child cannot look after itself, so someone else has to. So it has to be you. So at that point, happiness is not the point. It is, dare I say, the well-being of the child. Now, as this was written, it was many generations before we got the legal sentence, the well-being of the child. But later on, that was used for the same ends as what was being described in this screed as the happiness of the woman. But I say that as though there's a difference. What family courts nowadays describe as the well-being of the child means functionally exactly the same thing as the happiness of the woman. Because a lot of studies have been done into how single father families are nowhere near as bad predictors of waywardness as single mother families. Not that either should exist. I mean, obviously, the best predictor of a productive and happy life is the on-hand presence of both parents. And this is why it annoys me that men's rights advocates are seen as the opposite of feminists. I'm going to read the last sentence we just read, but with the genders reversed. She has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes of divorce in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of the men. The law in all cases going upon a false supposition of the supremacy of woman and giving all power into her hands. Now this does sound like an uncannily accurate description of family courts in the modern day. But I know of no men's rights advocate who would frame it around the happiness of the men. And I've been doing this for fucking 10 years. I don't know anyone who says, no, what we should do with the children should revolve around the happiness of the men. Like, no one. Like, no MRA, no MGTOW, no PUA has the gall to say the fate of a child should depend on the happiness of a man. Nobody, ever. It's always actually been the benefit of the child, and the child deserves both parents. At no point has it resembled this gynocentric pish that we are currently reading, and this is what we've been up against for the last century and some change. So fuck off with you guys are just the equivalent of feminists. Fuck off.
Yeah.
Fuck right off. Fuck to the ends of the earth, and then fuck back, and then fuck back off again.
Geez. The tough thing people don't understand is about the men's rights movement is that we have a variety of things that people in the movement do. So there are people who file lawsuits where legislation is discriminatory in order to get the courts to clarify that the legislation cannot be discriminatory. And right now, there is one such lawsuit in the Supreme Court in regard to the draft, with the primary hope being elimination of the draft. But if it can't be eliminated, then at the very least, it can have gender taken out of it, so that if Congress wants to enact a draft, they have to contend with the fact that people will be seeing them draft their daughters. And even if they can't stop them from drafting men on the basis of how men are valued, maybe they can stop them from drafting men on the basis of how the women that will be dragged along into it are valued, until we can get a better situation where we are not drafting men because men are valued as highly as women. But in any case, there's that end of it. There are people who help to get men out of abusive relationships. Some help by providing shelter. Some help by providing vouchers. In California, there was a lawsuit by the National Coalition for Men that pretty much forced the California system to degender its domestic violence response so that men who are trying to get out of abusive relationships can at least get a voucher to take their kids and go stay someplace. Which, personally, I think that's better than putting them in a shelter if there are women at the shelter, since we know that 2/3 or more of domestic violence is female perpetrated, female initiated, or both. And so you end up in a situation where these men may be going into an environment with violent women who have falsely accused their partners. And they may be vulnerable to those women. So it's better if they're in a hotel or some other area. If you can't set up a shelter just for men, you definitely don't want to house them with those women, because that's putting them out of the frying pan into the fire, right? But and again, that's National Coalition for Men does quite a bit. Their website is ncfm.org, and I would encourage our listeners to go check out their page on their successes. Among other things, feminists are always complaining that men are not treated seriously enough as parents because women are seen as the primary caregivers, and it limits women's role. But it wasn't feminists that got changing stations put into men's bathrooms in airports in California. It was men's rights activists who did that. Because there are dads who travel with their children. There are single dads, and then there are dads who take their children to see family when the wife has to work, or the wife has gone ahead because she didn't have to work, and the dad and the kids that went to school come along later. So there are different things that happen there, where sometimes a dad does need to go in and change his baby in the men's restroom. Doesn't want to go into the women's restroom. Women will have a fit, even though women go into men's restrooms all the time. So those are some successes. Like, there's a bunch of different things listed there. That's one that stood out to me because feminists claim it never happened. Well, National Coalition for Men did it. But then there's also, people who advocate for change for moving the Overton window, which is what we're doing. We advocate for changes in social attitudes. And our advocacy over the last 10 years has taken our advocacy, the advocacy of A Voice for Men, the advocacy of justice for men and boys, many organizations like us, has taken these issues from being in the background, in little forums all over the internet, to mainstream media discussing them. And yes, mainstream media, a lot of them are trying to discredit us. A lot of them are mad at us. But we've also had some people be unable to deny the things that we've said. And we've had some advocacy from people. Like, I still remember the October that Tucker Carlson spent on men's issues. And while he didn't get everything right, and he didn't talk to everybody that he could have talked to, he did speak to some prominent men's rights activists, and he did bring those issues to the forefront, and people began discussing them much more seriously after that, right? And it is because of people like us that there are people now with much bigger accounts taking a lot of heat for saying the same things we've been saying, where we get shadow banned, we get throttled, we get algorithmed out of existence, but they're under fire. And maybe Chloe Roma is, I don't know what I think of her. I had hope until the last thing that she said about men's rights activists, and then it was like, well, so much for that idea, right? But so I'm kind of disappointed there, but not shocked, because she's female, and that's pretty typical female narcissism.
She's a psyop. She's a psyop. They're all psyops. Everyone's a psyop. I'm pretty sure I'm
maybe.
a psyop. Like my memory got erased like in Total Recall, and I'm like some rogue agent. Like even I'm a psyop. I'm meant to be here to ruin you all, but I accidentally joined you. It's like Dances with Smurfs, or any of those well-known retellings of that story.
Jen Bottle wants to know what was that. Well, she pretty much said that she's the first person that ever talked about these issues publicly. She pretty much denied the existence of the entire men's rights movement because she didn't know us.
I tried to find that post. I don't know where.
She may have taken it down. Like, maybe she's embarrassed. Yeah. If she's embarrassed that she said that, that's a good sign. It's still, it is, her saying it in the first place is still female narcissism. It just depends on how she reacts to being corrected on it, right? If she,
well, that was her reaction to delete it and not say anything.
Yeah, like, she deleted it and didn't say anything. That kind of sucks. But if there's a point where she comes out and says, "Gosh, I didn't realize all these people were doing this previously," I'm sorry that I stepped on you guys or something like that, or I have a lot to learn or anything like that. That would be good. That would be a step forward. But if she doesn't do that, then fuck her. I lose all respect at that point. That's how I don't like to really necessarily call it judging people, but that's how I decide who I'm going to trust and respect and who I'm not. I live up to that too when I get information that proves me wrong about something, and I'll go back to probably one of my biggest embarrassments was on Reddit. Back in my Reddit days, I thought that Movember was similar to those silly Facebook campaigns where women will post some cryptic statement, like the color of their bra, but they don't say what it's the color of. They just post pink or green or whatever. And then you're supposed to ask what the post is about, and then they tell you it's about raising awareness for breast cancer, and now you know breast cancer is a thing because you didn't before, right? I think that's dipshittery at its worst. It's not even slacktivism. It doesn't do anything because everybody already knows about breast cancer, and everybody already knows all of the information that we're supposed to know in regard to breast cancer, what we're supposed to do, and blah, blah, blah. People are already donating. Millions of dollars are raised every year. It's a huge industry, right? So when you post the color of your bra on Facebook and then people ask you about it and you say that's what it's for, it's just virtue signaling. It has no value, right? Movember started out as an initiative to raise money to actually help research on testicular and prostate cancers, and it was a good initiative when it started out. It was great, and it's stayed good for a long time, but it now has started to fund organizations that accept the toxic masculinity narrative for treatment of men's mental health conditions. So it's like I would I wouldn't promote it today, but at the time that I made fun of it because I thought it was the same thing as the Facebook thing, and I had a whole bunch of people tell me otherwise. And, of course my response was to investigate, find out what Movember actually did, how it worked, and once that information was in my repertoire of information, I came back and I was like, wow, this is totally different. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was such a worthwhile endeavor, and went on to promote it every year until the last couple of years when it started to, get. I now just suggest people look at organizations themselves that are doing the research and donate directly. You don't have to go through an organization that's collecting for them. You can find out who they're donating to and judge for yourself. And it's probably a better way to deal with it than, not saying that you can't grow a mustache in November or anything like that. But there you go. So, with that out of the way, back to the divorce thing. Feminists got what they wanted in regard to divorce. And what has been the result? Are women happier? Because according to all of the surveys that measure women's happiness today, no. Women are not happier. More women are single moms. Many of them are single moms by choice. They're not ever getting married. They didn't choose to have a baby with a guy that they were going to marry. They chose to have a baby with a guy they weren't going to marry. Many of them are single moms by choice because they got married, they had kids, and then they got divorced. And many of them are getting divorced because they just don't feel it anymore. They're not happy in the marriage. They're bored. They want him to do the dishes more often.
Mm-hmm. The shit that if you read the articles, they say that, if men do housework, that it turns women off.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it, ladies? Well, we know what it is. They're just fucking lazy. They don't want to do the work. They want someone else to do the work. They don't want to have to bear the burden of, oh my God, washing dishes and cooking food, and it's just too much. I mean, despite the fact that, we have machines that were invented by men that will wash your dishes for you, that will wash your clothes for you, that there are machines that you can actually just put stuff in, right? You close the lid and you turn it on, you walk away and you come back and your dinner is done.
Yep.
It's amazing. It's amazing, but it's not good enough. It's never good enough. And they can't even be bothered to do that. It's just unbelievable, the oppression that women have to face, that, how do they even?
Yeah. The toughest part for me is getting up in the morning and spending half an hour not putting on any makeup. Oh, wait, I don't get up in the morning. I go to bed in the morning, so that whole narrative goes out the window right there.
Right.
Yeah. I actually spend a couple of hours not putting on any makeup and not putting any product in my hair and not using a curling iron. And
I know. It's so
terrible.
So cumbersome. I just don't know how I managed to not do any of that shit and still get 8 hours of sleep. Oh my God.
Yup. I don't ever lay still for 8 hours. If I do, something's wrong. I think my limit's about 6.
Yeah, I think we've learned on that. My body will shut down. It's just when it's done, it's done. There's no.
See, you're lucky.
There's
Mine
no
doesn't
pause
do that.
button.
Mine wakes up screaming. Right. Ah! You've been laying on me for this long. Get out of bed. Move. And then I get up and all of my joints are yelling, "Oil can."
Yeah, exactly.
So, but that's I've been an old lady for 50 years, so. But yeah, this thing, I'm sorry, but I just don't see it. I don't see how this benefited them in any way, shape, or form, and I don't see how this was about equality, because at no point did feminists, launching from this part of the Declaration of Sentiments, advocate for equal division of property following a divorce, equal division of custody following a divorce, equal culpability for behavior such as emotional abuse, right? Financial abuse, violent abuse, equal culpability for cheating. No. They fought for women to get out of culpability during divorce for abandonment, for emotional abuse, for denial of sex, which is emotional abuse also, for economic abuse, running up a shitload of debt in his name, for cheating, like just any kind of, you can do pretty much anything to a man as a woman, and he can't use it against you in the divorce, right? But if you're not happy and he's not making you happy, you can use that against him in the divorce. How is that equality? How is that anywhere near equality? How is it even slightly fair? Bueller?
Fair? What do you mean fair? What kind of hate speech is this?
Yeah. Yep. So, one of the things that men's rights activists have been fighting for, that feminists are panicked as fuck over, and they've been panicked for years, was custody rights for men. Right? Feminists went through opposing, they called it joint custody back in the 70s. Joint custody was maternal custody with paternal visitation rights, except that the visitation rights were also called custody, so that when the child was visiting with the father was considered to be in the father's custody. The father had custody during that time period. And the big change was, if little Billy fell and cut his knee on the steps and needed stitches, Dad could take Billy to the hospital and sign paperwork, and Billy could get those stitches without Mom having to show up and sign paperwork. Right? Dad could go into school and see Billy's report card and any other information the teacher was keeping and so on, and be in on the parent-teacher conferences and wasn't left out of everything. But he still only got maybe 2 weekends a month, and if he was lucky, another extra 6 hours in the evenings, a couple days a week total, if he was lucky, in the divorce. Right? So it was still not, it was joint custody, but it wasn't really. But feminists started citing that as, well, men have custody of their children. Right? Immediately, we started hearing about how men don't have custody because they don't fight for it. Well, what men were getting as custody was, every other weekend you get your kids, 16% of the time, totally helps, to parent your child when you see them 16% of the time. So then men fought for shared parenting, which shared parenting was joint custody with maybe a few more additional legal rights for the father, and maybe a slightly more expanded amount of time. Still not half the time. And feminists fought that. They opposed that. Feminist organizations like the National Organization for Women used the claim that making first joint custody and then shared parenting the default in divorce cases. So basically, if neither party said, well, we want something different than what it says in the paperwork automatically, if we don't edit it, then this is what it's going to say. Then they fought having that be the default by saying that it would force judges, against their will, to put children in abusive homes, even though all the judge had to do was rule one parent unfit or dangerous to the child, and they could put the child in the other home and limit the custody and access of the parent that they felt was unfit. Right? So there was no force So feminists basically lied, but it worked. It delayed the adoption of joint custody laws around the country, and then it delayed the adoption of shared parenting laws around the country. And when men's rights activists, fathers' rights activists in particular, started fighting for equally shared parenting laws, where 50-50 shared parenting would become the default, and the default divorce papers that, you basically just, if you don't dispute anything in it, you print out what the court system offers, and you read it over and you sign it. That's your divorce. Says the child will be with the parent A this many days and parent B this many days, back and forth. And again, the laws that were passed, and the laws that were introduced, the bills that were introduced, all said that this would be the default in cases that were uncontested. So when neither parent was saying, no, I want something different, and when the parents didn't agree to something different. So, for instance, if you live in California and you're getting divorced, and he's going to go live with his family in Northern California, and she's going to go live with her family in Southern California, trading the child off every 4 days is a bit of an inconvenience. So if it's Ohio's 50-50 shared parenting agreement used to be every 4 days. I think it's every 7 days now. So it allows the child to spend a week with each parent, and the trade-off can happen on the weekends. But yeah, that was also opposed by feminists, claiming that it'll force judges to put children in homes with abusive men, not abusive mothers and fathers, but abusive fathers. Even though most child abuse is female perpetrated, and most parental child abuse is done by the mother, and approximately 70%, about 2/3, of children killed by one parent acting alone are killed by their mother. But the father's the only one you should be worried about, right? And that's how feminists have handled divorce in the last 100 years. And that's why we are in a situation now where a lot of children are being raised in poverty without their fathers, in man deserts, circumstances where they have no male influence in their lives whatsoever, and circumstances where they have economic distress. They have bad learning environment. They learn what feminists would call toxic masculinity, which is basically they don't grow up, right? Because toxic masculinity, so-called toxic masculinity, is just acting like a child of either sex. But yeah, it's men's fault that divorce is bad, right? So, after depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it. That's not a female problem. I hate to say this again. I've said this several times throughout. Everything they're complaining about was true for most of the men in the country. This one.
In any case, I'm not going to argue that when the government taxes you for your labor, you absolutely should complain about it.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that. But yeah,
like people often supply all these sorts of arguments. Like some time ago, there was some Ghanaian guy who was surprised to learn that he wasn't a British citizen, because after living in Britain for 40 years, he attempted to procure some kind of services from the government, and they were like, "But you're not a British citizen." So we went, "Oh, go to the papers," and it was in the papers for a full cycle and a half of people saying, "Well, surely this man should get the advantages of being in this country if he is in this country. And well, not necessarily. And
Yeah.
once again, I forgot where I was going with this. But
Well, the
yeah,
big
it's
question is, was he being taxed for those services?
taxes. That's the thing. Yes, and it always comes down to, yes, this man should not be taxed if he's not getting the benefit of taxes.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're absolutely right. No one should be taxed if they're not getting the benefit of what taxes are supposed to be doing to benefit us. And whenever you start an argument like that, it should always come down to no one's getting the benefits.
Yeah, no one's really getting the
of,
benefits.
of what the government says they're doing with taxes. Because you all know this by now. I'm preaching to the choir. The government doesn't tax us for our own benefit. They tax us for their own benefit or its own benefit. I don't know what the correct pronouns are for a government.
So,
it's either it or they. It is certainly not we.
yeah, I have some terminology in mind, but it's not appropriate for YouTube. But I'll put it this way. Right? If taxes were spent the way pro-taxation people claim they should be spent, right? I wouldn't be as mad as I am. Right? I at least would have not just had to spend 2 weeks recovering from driving halfway across the country in a Jeep, because the roads in most of the country would not have been so bad that it felt like I was driving on Legos. Yeah, but there you go. Right? If we actually got the benefit of what we were paying for, the war in Afghanistan would not have lasted as long as it had lasted. And the win would have been decisive. It wouldn't have just not happened. It would have happened, and it would have been completely unreversible. Yeah, people think that the sentiment I expressed about Israel versus Palestine was unique to Israel versus Palestine. No, it's applicable to that too, right? If you have a little kid coming up to you and punching you over and over again, and you do nothing about it, or what you do about it is insufficient to stop the kid from continuing to punch you, and you let it go on for years and years and years, it's your fault. If you could put a stop to it and you don't, it's your fault. And I think that's what happened here. And I won't say that about our soldiers, per se, but about our government, absolutely. That the whole conflict in Afghanistan can be blamed on the government in the United States. So I'm not a big fan of how my tax dollars get spent. Most of how my tax dollars get spent is based on lies. And even the bit that's not is, it gets misdirected a lot. They're lying to us about pretty much everything. It's pretty much absolute shit. So in terms of her complaint about being taxed, I'm with her on the complaint about being taxed. What I am not with her on is the idea that it's a unique situation that women experienced and men didn't. Because the overwhelming majority of men in the United States during that time were paying taxes and they weren't represented. They didn't have the vote. Right? There were still limitations that men faced that kept them from having the vote. And there were women who had the vote in different states as they came in. So this was all bullshit. The next one. He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments. What a strange way to phrase, men do all of the labor to obtain and maintain resources and comfort in society.
Do you want the profitable employments, ladies? No, you just want the cushy jobs at Twitter 1.0, where you sit around, you lounge around computers pretending to do work.
And
for
drink wine
eight-
at work.
8 hours a day and eat sushi at work and stuff. Yeah. You're very good at the unprofitable parts of extremely profitable businesses, ladies. And I don't know what that says about you or anyone or anything else. But I mean, what would these women say if you showed them 100 years in the future? Do you think you'd be able to get across how pointless all their efforts were? All they did was throw money and resources into a bottomless pit of women who want to be paid for doing essentially nothing. I imagine they would look at it and say it's not good enough.
Yeah.
We need to find. There are still men making profits from removing the fatbergs from the sewers. And we need to figure out a way that women should get the money from men doing that. Women should
Changing light bulbs on radio towers. That's another one. Got to climb up 1,500 feet in the air, and in the wind and the rain, you have to change a light bulb that is bigger than your head.
Yeah, that's a profit that men are getting that women, for some reason, aren't getting. I can't imagine what the reason might be that they don't get the benefit of doing that job that they don't do. The mind boggles.
Yeah, it really gets interesting when you start getting into the logistics of how men earn more than women. Now back then, yeah, there were far more men who were doctors. There were a few women who were doctors. There were, I think, only men working in law at that time in the United States. Most teachers might have also been men at that point. There were at least some teachers that were women. One is famous and had her own series of novels later on that she wrote that was sort of not made into a TV show, but a TV show was made based on the theme of those novels that had a few of the stories from the novels in the TV show. And that would be Little House on the Prairie. But for the most part, when it came to bringing in resources that people needed in the home, bringing in resources that people needed to keep themselves alive, men did that. Creating things to help keep people comfortable and safe, men did that. Actually being the reason that people were comfortable and safe by going out and doing the things that it took to keep people comfortable and safe, men did that. Right? Yes, Richard Pierre, Laura Ingalls Wilder. And she wasn't a teacher most of her life, but she was a teacher for a while. I think her sister was a teacher at the School for the Blind for a while as well, but I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I read those books. But yeah, men did all of that. And yeah, she's actually bitching about the fact that women weren't doing that. Now, here's where she has a complaint that it's just a hair shy of legitimate. Right? And from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but a scanty remuneration. All right, so women who do other people's laundry, women who clean other people's houses, women who work in the bottom rungs of medicine, nurses' aides, candy stripers, even nurses back then were kind of bottom rung compared to doctors, midwives and such. Women kind of set the value of those jobs. Right, because it's women who hire housekeepers, it's women who hire maids, it's women who hire nannies and tutors and so on. Women are the ones that decide what those jobs are worth, and it's women who choose whether or not to take a job at such a wage. Not men. Men don't just go out and grab a woman and say, okay, you're going to come here and work in the coal mine, but we're going to pay you less money, and you can't leave. You have to do this job. You can't go get a job somewhere else, but we're still going to pay you less money. Right? So I don't have a lot of sympathy. Women could have fixed that problem a long time ago. All they had to do, men had their way of handling wage disputes, right? They organized. They created guilds. They created unions. They created professional organizations. Before teachers had the teachers union, they had something called professional organizations. They were not guilds. They were not unions. They negotiated as professionals. This is what we do. This is what we are providing. This is the service that you're getting. And this is the knowledge that we bring and the expertise that we bring. This is what we want as compensation. And these are the rules we want applied to our workplace. And they didn't treat it like a blue-collar job, and where unions are quite needed in terms of there's a significant loss of sight between the corporation and the individual worker in bigger work settings like that, in factories and anything bigger than a factory, because the top dog doesn't really have anything to do with what the bottom grunts are doing every day at work. So he's just looking at his books, right? He's looking at his bottom line. So it's up to the union to remind the boss and the board that the workers are people and not just little pawns that you put into place to do things. And that's pretty much been their function throughout their history. There's a lot of corruption that has taken place within unions, especially in the United States, during the 20th century. But their intended function and how they function when the corruption is kept out, that's actually a needed thing, right? And that collective bargaining, men did that forever. Women could have done that, but instead they appealed to the government to make the employer pay them the same wage, whether they're doing the same work or not. So if I work in a company that sells three-pronged widgets, I work at the three-pronged widget store, and my colleague sells $50,000 worth of widgets in a year, and I sell $50,000 worth of widgets in a year, then it's fair for me to get paid the same as him, as long as our other tasks are pretty much equal too. You know, cleaning tasks are all the other things you do in retail. If my colleague sells $70,000 worth of widgets in a year, and I only sell $50,000 worth, and he gets paid more than me, I can sue because we did the same job. And my employer then has to go into court and prove that there's a valid reason why he got a bonus and I didn't. So I create an inconvenience for my employer. What that does is that disincentivizes the employer to provide incentive pay to the employee to go above and beyond. And so everybody only sells 50,000 three-pronged widgets, because why would you try to sell 70,000 if you're not going to get that bonus? You can't get that bonus because if the person who gets it isn't a woman, all the women in the company can sue and say they're not getting paid enough. Right? That's what equal pay does. It's not equal pay for equal work. It's equal pay for the pretense. It's equal pay to avoid getting sued. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction, which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known. So I'm kind of a teacher of theology, right? As a teacher of theology, she is not known. That's not government in the United States. We formed a government that doesn't establish a church and that isn't governed by the church. It doesn't ruled by the church. So why is that even in there as a teacher of theology? Like, I can understand them complaining about medicine and law, except that women could go into those fields. They just didn't. But this is a document about voting rights. What can you vote for in an election for government officials that would affect whether women became teachers of theology?
And someone has to bring up the idea that he closes all the avenues of wealth and distinction. Distinction is another thing, but he doesn't. All the avenues of wealth, there is one particular avenue of wealth that women have enjoyed for the longest of times and who still do enjoy it now. Who are the world's richest divorcees? They are all women. They are all women. I mean, nobody looks at that list. They're more interested in the top 100 men who are independently wealthy, one reason or the other. No one looks at the top 100 people who earned their fortune from divorcing someone, because that would throw somewhat of a wrench into the narrative that there is an avenue of wealth available to women that is very, very available to women. You basically have to encounter a man. I mean, your best option is to marry him for like 2 seconds and then divorce him and go, whoops, I need half of your money now because when I was married to you for 2 seconds just now, I was able to have all of your money. And now that I hate you, I should still be allowed
to have all of your money.
all of your money. And this, how can they have been so fucking centrally blind to this back in those days, as they still are now? Oh wait, yeah, I can see how they were so blind to it then, because they're still so blind to it now. That how many avenues there are for a woman to drain the wealth from a man. And when I say wealth, I mean labor. It might not be his own labor, it might be his father's labor, or his father's father's labor before that. But when you're extracting wealth from someone, you're extracting someone's labor. Because that is how it works. It all appeared into the economy some time ago from someone else's labor. And it's always a man's labor. And here's this bitch saying he closes all the avenues to wealth. No, this has always been the point of marriage, come to think of it. It was never just a thing based on the infatuation of romantic chivalry. It's always based on this economical model. And, you know, in some ways, maybe that is more reliable than this assurance that everyone who falls madly in love with someone else will live happily ever after.
Yeah, that's not how relationships work, by the way.
It's never been how relationships work. It's just this modern, romanticized, chivalrically romanticized storybook that Disney has a lot to answer for in the last century, and it is a century now. Go on.
Yeah, you know what it's resulted in, right? Like, if you look at how dating is discussed and how dating has been discussed, like, for Generation X, our whole lives we've seen this. In publications going back to the ones that were written for us as teenagers when we were still in school, right? The hardship of dating, compatibility issues, finding a partner, keeping a partner, making a partner happy, and being happy with a partner, right? Those things, there's whole industries set up around discussing this, evaluating this, theorizing about this, advising people on it, selling people advice, and selling people tools to enhance their ability to engage in this search for a partner that's the perfect partner, the one, and then after it's all over, there's a whole other industry that exists around breaking you up, helping you hurt each other, helping you humiliate each other, right? Helping you drag each other through the mud, and then telling you how great you are for surviving that. That neither of those two industries existed when marriage was arranged. Not saying that arranged marriage has to be the way things go, but our species did a really shitty job of finding a way out of it and into something functional. We still haven't hit that functional stage. Like, we had a period of time where it was more functional than it is today, but it was a lot of work. People don't seem to be willing to do that work today. They don't get married with the idea that they are dedicated to each other's welfare, that they are dedicated to their household, that they intentionally are going to put effort into making each other happy and working together to keep their household comfortable and safe and enjoy each other's company and so on, maintaining their loyalty and their interest in each other. Like, that's not something that just happens on its own. You do that with your friendships. You keep in touch with each other in your friendships. Even just sending each other memes is keeping in touch, right? But people don't do that in their marriages. They think it's going to be happily ever after with no effort whatsoever. No, it takes the most work. And if you really got married with the idea of love and dedication to your partner, you should be geared up to do that work. You should be excited about it. Thinking about, you go out and shop for groceries or something, and you spot something that your partner would really love. It should be exciting to bring that home because you know you're going to make them happy. But people lose sight of that. They compete over, well, this person doesn't do enough dishes, this person doesn't do enough laundry, I'm not bringing enough home, this person's not bringing enough home, I'm not happy, I'm not satisfied, we're not watching the shows I want to watch on TV, we're watching the shows he wants to watch on TV, but I'm not going to tell him. I'm just going to sit here and be mad, and if he doesn't figure it out, then he's a bad husband. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've run into women mad at their husband for something, and they'll tell me all about it. Right? Oh, he does this, he does. Well, have you talked to him about it? What does he say? I shouldn't have to tell him. Fuck yes, you have to tell him. How else is he supposed to know? But yeah, no, it's all about, denying the woman, right? It's all about making things rough on the woman. And dating, we don't teach our kids that when you're dating and you're engaging in this hookup culture that everybody's all into and been into for the last 40 years, you're partner shopping. You're looking for somebody that you can be dedicated to and make a life with, make a home with, and cling to each other for happiness and solidarity and camaraderie and all of the things that come from a great relationship that you work at all the time. So you got a lot of jaded kids getting divorced.
We have an entire industry devoted to telling women to end their relationships with men. It's called therapy.
Yep.
I mean, it's called a whole bunch of things, but it's it's centered around this this industry that's called therapy, and it is an industry. It's not an industry that produces anything. It's an industry that that invites women, and I guess some men, but mostly women, into a small room to convince them that the relationship they are currently in is toxic, and that they need to do better. Namely, that the women need to marry a slightly more handsome and rich rock star, and that the men need to go off and think about their lives, and stuff like that. And if even if that doesn't work out, there's another $1 billion industry called divorce, which makes up, and that's not just a small little corner of legal institutions. I did a work experience module in Manchester County Court once, and they gave me some options because they had a number of different departments, one of which was divorce, and another of which was, I can't even remember what it was. I think it was just ordinary county court prosecutions. Just any given dispute that anyone could have. I think we had one of them. Anyway, there already was. But yeah, any given county court in the country, or whatever the American equivalent of county court is, half of that building, right? Any given building you might go to, half of that building is devoted to divorce. Because there's so fucking many of them. Like, it's an understatement to call it $1 billion industry. It's probably $1 trillion industry at this point. You see how much money is changing hands between countries, between empires, between the shadiest of possible agents. Yeah, this is a bureaucracy of abstractions that has existed for a long time, and one of its biggest cash cows is the divorce industry. It's awful. I cannot even begin to describe it. I only saw it with my naive teenage eyes for a month or so before I was like, this is awful. Why does this exist? Why would any of this need to exist? Why is the divorce institution like gigantic compared with the marriage institution? How did that happen? Why would that happen? Why are there orders of magnitude more money in divorce than there is in marriage? Not that there should be any money in marriage in the first place. That was never the point. But why is there so much money in divorce? That's a complete inversion of whatever should have been. What's going on? And I put it to you, gentlemen and ladies in the audience, that it all started with Man Bad Woman Week, with this, some call it romantic, gynocentric, chivalric, whatever, and I think they're all along the lines of what's going on here. It's just difficult to name because it's been going on for not just half a century, but half a millennium, and probably some change.
Yeah,
And that's why it's so difficult to get across to people, because here's me trying to talk about the way divorce courts have changed in the last 100 years, but it's so much deeper than that. It's that they weren't called divorce courts half a millennium ago, but there was an equivalent. There was this whole stack of shelves put in place to make sure that women get whatever they want at the expense of anything men can be rinsed for. and here's me saying it started in in medieval times, as though gynocentric romantic chivalry was the beginning of it. No, it's called romantic, which is named after Rome. This has been going on for a long time.
Well, just remember, we kind of went over that, and it's not named for, like, the romantic chivalry has nothing to do with the romantic storytelling of Rome. It's completely outside of that.
But I'm trying to push back this narrative as far as I can, like, because so many people think it's only happened in the last 10 years. Like,
no,
this woke thing only began in 2016. No,
we did an episode on this. We talked about the rise of romantic chivalry and that school of gynocentrism, where it was actual gynocentrism and not a focus on the child-rearing value of women, but just women for their own sake, going back to, I think it was the 13th century. So we're looking at something that's been going on for almost yeah, just it's 800 years. It's been 800 years. It's just crazy.
At the very least.
Yeah.
Give me a number and I'll tell you it's a bigger number.
Yeah, probably. And I mean, that interest has existed among women for sure prior to that. Women have had that sense of entitlement prior to that, at least in the upper echelons. This is remember, it began among the French aristocracy, not commoners. So that tells you a lot about, you didn't see women with their arms up to the elbows in the river washing their clothes, talking about how it's important for a man to kneel when he's asking for a woman's hand in marriage. That was courtesans and princesses and so on. But yeah. In 1837, Oberlin College opened its doors to all students, including women and people of color, which they didn't call people of color back then, because that dipshittery that it's different to say people of color than colored people or black or whatever didn't exist in the 19th century. But that's 1837, right? And then in 1848, so 11 years later, the Declaration of Sentiments was written, in which Elizabeth Cady Stanton says, he has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. So Oberlin College was open to women for 11 years when she wrote that. Women also could enroll at Wesleyan College. There were other women's colleges back in the day that they could enroll at and enroll in. And even before that, there were women who enrolled in colleges and earned degrees. There were different barriers. It was assumed that they were never going to do the job. It was assumed that they weren't going to be able to perform at the way a man performs in the profession. Or in the case of Elena Lucrezia Cornerio, that's not her last name. Elena Lucrezia Cornerio Piscopia enrolled at the University of Padua to study theology. She impressed her instructors, excelled at public debate, applied for her degree, and the Catholic Church intervened because that's their purview, right? Not the government, Catholic Church. Now, back then, the Catholic Church had influence on her government to a much higher degree than it does today. But at the same time, it's still not man closing all avenues of education. She had the education. She didn't get the degree. And so she didn't become a higher up in the church. However, she did get her PhD in philosophy, and she became a professor. So there you have capability of getting a degree anyway. So women could actually attend university. Women could actually get degrees. And in fact, in 1862, Mary Jane Patterson became the first black woman to earn a bachelor's. By 1900, 1 in 3 black professionals in the U.S. held a degree from Oberlin. So you had women, you had minorities, everybody could attend, as long as they could do the work. And they did. So this was just bullshit. Denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education. No, she could have gone to school if she wanted to. So let's see, he allows her in the church as well as state, but in a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church. So this has to be about the Catholic Church, because women held positions in other churches. And in fact, one of the women that was part of organizing this, the conference at which this was read out, was a Quaker minister. So I'm assuming the church has to be referring to the Catholic Church, because lots of churches had different ways of doing things, and there were female preachers, female ministers in Protestant churches going way back. He has created false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated but deemed of little account in man. This is one that I dispute on one basis. I don't think men made that decision. I think women did. Right? Women are the ones with the finer sensibilities argument. You can't cuss in front of me because I have finer sensibilities. You can't treat a lady that way because I have finer sensibilities. You have to walk on the street side in case somebody splashes through a puddle because I have finer sensibilities. You can't show me the harsh side of life because I have finer fucking sensibilities. Right? And you can't acknowledge when I don't live up to them, because I am a lady. But, when men are just around other men, they're not that picky. And it's, women had the luxury and tolerance in society of being that picky. Men didn't, because they were the ones doing the dirty jobs. They were the ones fighting in the wars. They were the ones facing bad weather, going out and bringing the animals in, going out and fixing the roof. They were the ones dealing with everything about life that is ugly and nasty and mean and hard and gross. Everything that doesn't have to do with the ugly, nasty, mean, hard, and gross part of birth and babies. Right? So, maybe their sensibilities aren't finer. So what? And the other thing is, if a man conceives a child out of wedlock, he is still not incapacitated. He might not even know, unless she tells him, the mother tells him, But he's not incapacitated. He's not prevented from doing what it takes to support that family. Right? If a woman conceives a child out of wedlock, she is incapacitated to a degree for part of the 9 months that she's pregnant. Childbirth could kill her. Back then it was a little more common than it is now. And it actually does put her in a situation where she's created a mouth to feed that she is not equipped to feed on her own. She turns to the community, and the community helps her. So she costs the community resources. So it is fair to judge women more harshly for that than it is than to judge men. Women are more, they have reason to be more aware of the consequences. And they have reason to be more careful about the consequences. And we'll stop at this next one. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her sphere of action when that belongs to her conscience and her God.
You're really going to appeal to Jehovah?
Apparently.
Because you're going to find some weird shit you might not like.
I don't think she read her Bible.
In any given established religion, you're going to find some weird shit you don't like. Some weird shit that people have figured out after thousands of years of trying to deal with your bullshit, bitch.
Well, you think about it, alright? The idea that a woman should obey her husband comes straight out of the Bible. So this idea that she's objecting to comes straight from the source that she's wanting to go to directly with her conscience. Right? The rules about how women should act, that all the stuff that she's objecting to in terms of society's morals where women are concerned versus where men are concerned, those are right out of the religion that she's claiming men keep women from being in charge of. Even the idea that women should not be teachers, right out of there. Doesn't say women shouldn't be judges, but yeah, she's really failing to understand the religion that she's criticizing. Or at least that she's criticizing the administration of by men. They're just doing what it says in the instruction manual.
Like I said, it's not just Christianity, it's any given religion. Any given system of ideas that's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
The will has some kind of sub-clause saying, men and women are different, be it yin or yang, or be it Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or whatever. There's or a creation myth like Adam and Eve, sort of briefly outlining. Do be careful, because women can be presented with the Garden of Eden, and then they'll be like, yeah, it's not enough. No, is it?
Why can't I have that fruit over there? Yep. Well, even if you look at religions that brag more about gender balance, I can't say they are more gender balanced necessarily, but they brag more about gender balance, like more modern religions like Wicca. And I call Wicca a modern religion because it's not the ancient version of witchcraft that existed pre-Christianity in Europe.
Paganism also had some of those rules that you all don't like, but you just don't like to look at them.
So Wiccans decided to everything had to be mirrored, right? Lord and Lady, God and Goddess, all and the elements, and you have various representatives of the masculine and feminine throughout all of your rituals. But if you are in an environment where you're surrounded by mostly Wiccans, the goddess gets greatly emphasized over the god. And he sort of goes and sits in a corner over there and is quiet and doesn't interrupt the women. Right? That's pretty much the way pagan gatherings are run. It's pretty much the way, like it's an afterthought. It's goddess, 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 goddess. Oh yes, and God. We're balanced. No, you're not. You're a hair shy of Tyanic Wicca, which is pretty much goddess without the god. So I know there are people who are going to be pissed off at me for saying that, because I've got friends who are Wiccan, and I've maintained all my old friendships, but it's true. It's not more balanced. It's just a backlash to this in a lot of ways. So there you go. It's there isn't a religion you can turn to appeal to for egalitarianism. It's something that you have to do yourself, because that's a personal attitude. It's not something someone else can dictate to you. The only place where it can be dictated is in law, and the only way that it can be dictated in law is however the laws are written, they must be applied evenly across demographics and not discriminate against one demographic for the benefit of another. So we have, let's see, Super Chows. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 417, honey for the Badgers. Sorry I'm late. I've been on vacation. Well, you're lucky. And we can forgive that. Vacation is a good reason to be late.
I'm on vacation too. And I'm too busy enjoying my life to give a shit about all of this apocalypse. But I'm trying.
I'm technically not on vacation, but I haven't worked in retail now for 10 years, so I feel like I'm on vacation. Everybody who works in retail or has worked in retail knows what I'm talking about. I'm doing another job full-time, I'm working overtime, and I'm doing a second job, and I still feel like I'm on vacation because I'm not working in retail anymore. Richard Beer gave us $5 and said, funny how you don't hear women complaining about the household chores in the caring for her multiple cats, where does having the premium sports package on your cable subscription fall under the denial of sex front? Oh yes, the football widows, right? Super Bowl widows. Oh my god. I don't have his attention 24/7 because for this many hours on this weekend, he's busy watching TV. And I'm not watching it with him.
And it has to be said, if you don't like women having cats, then why do you have dogs? And maybe I should leave it there. Like, maybe all of these things are substitutes for the children you ought to be having. And I say that as someone who has no interest in having children, but I have no interest in replacing those children with dogs or cats. And there's a lot of people who have children and dogs or cats, so it's not necessarily a replacement for anything. But
heck, when I was 12, I had pet rats.
No comment.
I broke the doctor.
I do not like rats. I don't understand anyone who does like rats. They have horrible, creepy, tiny hands. They have like fingers. They're human hands, but they're tiny and sharp. They're awful, and they do bite you. Don't let Karen tell you that rats won't bite you unless you intimidate them. That is not true. I've been there. I've had a housemate who enjoyed pet rats, and one of them just crawled on my shoulder, and I just froze. I was like, okay, if I do nothing, then it's not going to bite me on the earlobe. If I just sit here and do nothing, it's not going to bite. Oh, it bit me on the earlobe! Fucking rats will do
Yeah,
that.
they'll bite.
They'll bite for no fucking
But-
reason. If
well,
you just stood
I
there
won't say
being
that was for
completely
no reason.
stationary.
Yeah, they can tell when you're acting
When you're
abnormally,
afraid,
when you're afraid.
is that what
yeah.
are you gonna do the
Yeah.
dog person thing?
Oh,
they
no,
can
it's
smell
not-
your fear.
It's not a
It's
smell.
not their
it's
fault.
A behavior.
They smelled
you-
your fear and they attacked you, so you deserved it.
No,
This
when you
is
freeze
so-
like that, that's intimidating. Because to an animal that size, someone your size freezing is preparing to attack. So
Oh, come
it's not-
on! This
it
is
doesn't
exactly
make
the
it-
same thing
It
that
doesn't make
feminists
it.
say.
It
about
doesn't
this
make it you're doing something bad, but it's not without reason. It's animals have instincts, and I wouldn't hold a rat if I was afraid of one. We had a lady that came into my house when I was that age. My mom was on city council. We had a one of her co-councilmen wasn't really very nice to her. It's kind of like the whole frenemy thing. And she tried to fake cozy up to me, like, oh, isn't that cute? You have a pet rat. And I was annoyed. If I'd realized what was going to happen to the rat, I wouldn't have done this, because I'm sure she was traumatized in the end. Although they can fall from quite a height and not get injured. But I held it up. I held her up. And she's looking, and she held her hand out, even though you could tell she really did not want to touch this animal. And my pet rat climbed up onto her shoulder, sniffed at her hair a little bit, and she did the same thing. She froze. Well, the rat didn't bite her. She tried to escape. But this was a big woman. And so she dove in between the Plymouth rocks into the little hole in the cleavage that's created when they are so big that they can't completely squish each other, and got stuck upside down. And this poor woman practically had a seizure trying to get this rat out of her dress. It was, at the time, it seemed kind of, funny, but in the moment, I was a little kid. I was not little. I was 12. But I was immature enough to find the trauma of the moment hilarious. And she jumped up and down and flapped her arms around and screamed and everything, and the rat goes shooting straight down onto the floor and ran away. And it took me hours to find her, hiding in a little corner underneath a chair, still shaking. So, like, if you don't like handling animals, you shouldn't handle animals. It's the same thing I say to people. There are people that never wanted to have kids, but they conceive a child and they raise the child and they treat the child badly, and then they're shocked when the child turns out to have dysfunctionality as an adult. If you don't want to raise children, don't conceive a child. If you don't want to raise pets, don't get a pet. If you don't like the idea of pets, don't try to force an interaction that is going to be uncomfortable for you and the animal, because all you end up doing is making yourself vulnerable when the animal acts like an animal with instincts. It doesn't mean it's your fault the animal behaved that way, just like it's not your fault if you get raped because you hang out with criminals. But if you don't hang out with those criminals, then you're not vulnerable to them, are you?
So don't hang around with rats. That's the moral of the story.
Unless you like them.
They're literally rats. Consider the Aesop's fable of the frog and the scorpion. It works for almost any animal. Like, they don't care about you, folks. You can cage them in whatever size cage you want, and you can say, "Oh, this animal is my friend. It treats me like an equal, like I treat it as an equal while I keep it in a cage," and like, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think
Like,
rats are your friend. I think they're fun and entertaining, but that's about as far as I can go. You can have an affection for them because they're cute, but I don't know that their little brains have... I don't think the concept of friendship is a possibility for them.
You should try and have relationships with humans, folks. Like, I know we all love cats and dogs and rodents and snakes or whatever. But that should be a last resort in the event that you have some kind of condition that prevents you from being able to interact with humans. But my first instinct would be to question this appraisal of yours that you're unable to interact with and articulate your thoughts with humans. Before you decide to get a pet that you keep under lock and key, and tell yourself that it is your friend, I would recommend seeing if you could do that with humans, whom you don't have to keep in a cage. And I've pissed off so many people right now, and I'm not even sorry. But we're seeing all sorts of symptoms these days.
Yeah, I think people need to be more realistic about their relationship to animals. And once upon a time, we used to be a lot more realistic about that. Most of our animals were recognized as work animals, right? And nowadays, you look at it, and people carry their dog around in their purse. And now they're not recognizing the difference between their purse puppy and their child, which is why we have toddlers and tiaras, and we have toddlers and underwear that tucks it in so everybody thinks you're a girl. Like, that's what it leads to. But I don't know. Like, if my husband and I ever move out of the city and into the country, where we have, not so many people close to us, we would probably have a guard dog. Just because it's a different situation out there. The cops are not like 2 minutes away, so that would be a practical thing, right? If we had a farm, we would definitely have 17 cats, but they would live in the barn.
I would urge you all to make friends with the humans in your local environment. Now, this is obviously not advice that I'm gonna.
That depends on your local environment.
My life belongs to the internet now, so I never talk to the locals in my local area of Little England, and I'm not gonna even give anyone any hints as to where it is I live. But I mostly interact with humans, so I don't I don't have to subject myself to those rules. The humans I interact with are in countries 3,000 miles away. So yeah, I get it. You're all going, well, you don't even interact with humans properly. Yeah, I guess I don't. I interact with humans on the other end of a system of microphones that extends across the world. And I consider that better than pretending that I'm interacting with dogs and cats. And that's not necessarily much better that I interact with humans 3,000 miles away rather than interacting with humans in my local area. But I only do that because I don't want any human in my local area to figure out that I'm Dr. Random McCam and that I'm a threat to women everywhere and stuff like that. I'm weird. I'm lucky that I've found a niche in which I can exist and be this weird. But for anyone else who's listening, humans are better than animals. Like, humans are the best animal if you are a human. I know that sounds. I don't know why that sounds controversial, but it apparently does. I know a lot of you think dogs are better than humans. I know a lot of you think cats are better than humans, and in some ways they are, in terms of their ability to see things and jump on things. But
also,
ultimately,
they do not create a government and start taxing each other.
Yes, there is yeah. But at the end of the day, humans are your best friends. I know this is hard for so many people. This came up during the man versus bear thing. That
Well,
there's
I'll
so
put
many
it
women.
this way.
But so many women said they would prefer a bear to a man, and I'm here trying to argue this with men who would rather spend time with a dog than a man.
I'll
And I'm
put
like,
it this
do
way.
you see how that connects to things?
The one of the first really memorable things that happened to me during my childhood. In fact, so memorable that despite most people not forming memories from that early in life, I remember parts of it. It was a near-death experience from an asthma attack, right? And the reason I survived it had absolutely nothing to do with animals. In fact, an animal probably contributed to it, because we had a cat and I had an allergy we didn't know about. But I lived because my dad drove like an ambulance driver. He had been an ambulance driver while he was in high school and college. And because a police officer saw him driving a regular car as though it were an ambulance, pulled up beside him when he didn't pull over for the flashing lights, looked inside the car and saw the blue-faced kid, and then motioned him forward, went around him, and led us through Lima, Ohio, through every traffic light, just pausing a little bit ahead of us before we went through the intersection to run his lights and sirens and make sure that nobody crashed into us as we were on our way to the hospital, and then reached into the car when we got there and pulled my mom and me out together so that we could get me into the hospital for treatment about 5 minutes before I would have been dead if it had taken us any longer to get there. So, yeah, people are pretty cool. Even though there are some people that are assholes, I would much rather have had a person come along, in particular a cop, in that moment, than any animal in the world.
Dolphins would never do that.
No,
Killer whales would never do that.
Dolphins will, though, rape you to death.
Exactly. Like,
I've been traumatized ever since I learned that.
like humans will save dolphins from a dire situation. Humans will save capybaras from a dire situation. Capybaras will not save humans from a dire situation.
Won't they eat you?
No, capybaras are like large rats.
Okay.
In the Amazon.
Oh, well, actually, then they would eat you if you were dead.
They might, and
Right,
that is the point. The effort that you put into saving other animals, those other animals will not put into saving you. In that sense, yes, humans are better than other animals because they can understand the future. They can save other animals from extinction. Yes, they can cause the extinction of other animals, and that's very unfortunate. But so can other animals. There are many bird species that have been wiped out entirely by a single cat specimen. Because cats don't give a shit if they're wiping out an entire species. Humans do wipe out entire species, but they give a shit. And they try not to.
Yeah, and somehow mosquitoes still exist, damn it. But in any case, we're so far into the weeds. I will point out that, the memory that I explained about the primary people who helped me in that situation, even though it was my mom's knowledge that set them in motion, were men. So that's just something to think about as well. Mom knew what to do. Dad and the police officer both took immediate action. So there you go.
Men rule, women rule, men and women together. Rule.
Yep. And that's how men and women work together. We will continue with this next week, and we should finish, I think, the Declaration of Sentiments next week. Yeah, we will finish the Declaration of Sentiments next week, and we'll look a little bit more at the timeline for what's going on. The interesting thing is, at this point, we're before the Civil War in the United States. There is stuff going on in Canada and Australia, but they're both not countries yet. They're still territories of England. And so there's a lot of changes taking place. There's a lot of little buttons to push on that timeline. I know because I put them all there. So we'll pick up then from here then. But going on, let's see. We have a super chat. Albert Nader Retro gave us $5 Canadian and said that radio towers are 1,820 feet, and somebody has to change those lights at the top sometime. I guarantee you it's never been a woman, even if one wanted to. And yeah, I liked to climb everything in sight when I was younger. Probably would have applied for that job. Probably wasn't strong enough to carry the gear. Because I look at those guys when they're doing that job, they got a bunch of stuff hooked onto them and everything. So I probably would not have qualified. But I would have loved being up that high for all of the 5 minutes it took for me to freeze my ass off. Then I might have complained about it a bit. But I didn't do that job. I photographed sports for my local newspaper during that time period. And let's see if we got any other ones, because that was way, way back. And there's been quite a lot of comments since then. Scrolling, and we're scrolling, and that's it. So no more super chats. The last comment I see is Dick. Which belongs in the show, for sure. No super or rumble rants. Done with the super chows. So thanks everybody for listening, both to the topic and the rants at the end. Thanks to my two co-hosts for sticking out. This has turned out to be kind of a long sausage. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And remember to check us out on Badger Feed, and remember to feed the badger. And good night, all.
Thank you, Dick.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.